In the winter of 1851, a teacher named Elizabeth Hartwell uncovered something in the basement of St. Catherine's Academy for Young Ladies that would follow her for the rest of her life. Hidden behind a false wall in what seemed to be a forgotten storage space, she discovered 24 tiny beds, each one chained with iron shackles still attached to the headboards. Next to every bed lay a single object, a torn doll, a faded ribbon, a small wooden cross, each one a child's final memory. Etched across the wall in what looked like a desperate scrawl made by a trembling hand were the words, "We are still here." Authorities in Massachusetts buried Elizabeth's report so deep that it wouldn't be seen again for over a century. In 1987, during renovations, construction workers uncovered her original written testimony sealed inside a mason jar behind the altar of the Academy's chapel. What they found about the fate of those 24 orphan girls exposed one of the most tightly protected secrets in New England's history. A secret so dark, it was preserved by 3 women who called themselves nuns, and who would kill to keep it hidden. Before we continue the story of St. Catherine's Academy, I need to tell you something important. This channel isn't for everyone. It's only for those brave enough to confront the secrets history tried to erase. If you're one of the few who can face the truth about what really happened in that academy, hit subscribe and ring the notification bell. And tell me, comment below, and let me know what state you're listening from. Do you have the courage to find out what became of those 24 girls? Let's uncover it together. But before we go forward, we must understand how a place that promised refuge became a chamber of nightmares. The year was 1834, and Massachusetts was booming. The Industrial Revolution had turned cities like Boston and Worcester into centers of industry and labor. But the rise of factories brought with it a darker consequence: thousands of orphaned children with nowhere to go. Salem, Massachusetts in 1834 was still living under the long shadow of its past. Though the infamous witch trials were nearly 150 years gone, the townspeople remained rigidly religious and suspicious of anything that didn't conform. The skyline was dotted with white steeples of Congregationalist churches, pointing toward gray skies like fingers that accused rather than welcomed. It was in this strict religious landscape that St. Catherine's Academy for Young Ladies was founded, standing solemnly on Gallows Hill Road. The name of the road was chillingly appropriate for what the future would reveal. The Academy occupied a large 3-story brick structure that had once belonged to a wealthy merchant family. Its Gothic revival design, with its sharp gabled roofs and narrow, towering windows, gave the building a false sense of nobility. Beneath that elegance, something far more sinister waited to unfold. St. Catherine's marketed itself as a Christian institution focused on educating orphaned girls between the ages of 12 and 17. Printed on fine parchment and sent across New England, their brochures promised training in etiquette, skills in the domestic arts, and eventual placement in upright Christian homes. Parents who had died from consumption, cholera, or accidents in the factories could rest easy, believing their daughters were being nurtured with care. At the center of this operation stood a woman named Mother Superior Victoria Wittmann. She was tall, strict, and dignified, with steel-gray hair pulled into a tight bun beneath her habit. Her speech carried the polished accent of Boston's upper class, and she spoke passionately about her mission to serve God by caring for abandoned children. She claimed to have studied at the respected Mount Holyoke Female Seminary and to have worked in Irish Catholic orphanages before coming to Massachusetts. Sister Margaret Collins was the perfect complement to Wittmann, gentler, younger, with soft eyes, and a kindness that immediately calmed the frightened girls. She taught literature and music, and her soft Irish accent reminded many of the girls of the mothers they had lost. Those who arrived broken and grief-stricken found comfort in her presence. The third and final figure in their trinity was Sister Agnes Murphy, a stern woman in her 40s with a mind for discipline and numbers. She managed the Academy's letters, finances, and daily routines with an iron will. Her habit was always perfectly pressed, her rosary always within reach, and her authority unquestioned within the Academy's walls. To the citizens of Salem, St. Catherine's seemed like a godsend. It offered a much-needed solution to the problem of orphaned girls without homes. Even ministers from rival Protestant churches gave their approval, despite theological disagreements. The mayor himself attended the dedication ceremony in September of 1834, offering praise to Mother Superior Wittmann's Christian compassion. What no one knew at the time was that the Academy's walls would soon echo not with hymns or laughter, but with cries that no one would hear. The girls who arrived at St. Catherine's Academy came from every corner of New England. There was Mary O'Brien, just 13, whose parents perished in a textile factory fire in Lowell. Sarah Thompson, 15, had been orphaned when consumption claimed her entire family in a Boston tenement. Little Catherine Murphy, unrelated to Sister Agnes, was only 12 when her father was killed in a railroad accident, leaving her mother too poor to care for her. Each girl who stepped through the gates was welcomed the same way: a warm meal, a clean bed, and a promise of a better future. They were told they'd receive an education that would prepare them to become teachers, governesses, or respectable wives. Most importantly, they were told that by the time they turned 18, the sisters would place them with good Christian families who would give them the lives their own parents never could. The daily routine at St. Catherine's was strict, but not unusual for the time. The girls rose before sunrise for morning prayers. Their days were filled with lessons in reading, writing, arithmetic, and domestic skills. Evenings ended in quiet devotional study. They wore plain gray dresses and white aprons. Their hair was always pulled back in modest, obedient styles. They learned to sew, to cook simple meals, to maintain a household, and to behave like proper Christian ladies. From the outside, the Academy looked like everything it claimed to be. Visitors, rare as they were, saw well-mannered girls quietly at work. Dormitories were spotless and sparse, but adequately furnished. The nuns appeared devoted, sacrificing worldly pleasures to serve the forgotten daughters of God. When ministers or town officials stopped by, they saw only what Mother Superior Wittmann wanted them to see. But there were things they didn't see. They didn't see the third floor, which was always locked and dismissed as seasonal storage. They didn't see the basement workshop where the girls were said to practice advanced domestic arts, yet which was always mysteriously empty during tours. They didn't notice that while new girls regularly arrived, none of the older residents ever seemed to age out. Most of all, they never asked why, in nearly 2 decades of operation, no former student had ever written back, returned a visit, or been seen again. The first sign that something was terribly wrong at St. Catherine's didn't come from within its walls. It came from a seamstress in Boston's North End. Her name was Emma Prescott. It was a cold February morning in 1843, nearly 9 years after the Academy had opened. Emma was walking to work through a maze of narrow streets near the harbor. As she passed an alley between 2 brick buildings, a familiar sound stopped her. A lullaby. It was a song she knew by heart. Mary O'Brien used to sing it at the textile mill where they had worked before her parents died. Emma followed the sound to a small second-story window in one of the city's most notorious brothels. Heavy curtains hung inside, but a small gap revealed a girl with dark hair and painfully familiar features. Even after 3 years, Emma was sure it was Mary O'Brien, the same Mary who was supposedly living a new life with a Christian family. But this Mary was wearing a silk dress no 16-year-old orphan should own. Her hair was arranged in an elaborate style, refined, adult, and wrong. But it was her eyes that shook Emma most. They were empty, eyes that had seen too much, eyes that had stopped hoping. Emma stood frozen, trying to convince herself she was mistaken. But the song continued. It was Mary's voice. She was sure of it. Emma approached the brothel's door, but a large man intercepted her. He made it clear that girls like her didn't belong there. That evening, Emma wrote a letter. She sent it to St. Catherine's Academy, addressed directly to Mary. She asked about her friend's well-being. She mentioned that she thought she saw Mary in Boston. She expected a kind reply, maybe even a letter from Mary herself. What she received chilled her. A response came within a week. It was signed by Sister Agnes Murphy. The letter thanked Emma for her concern. It said Mary had been placed with a religious family in western Massachusetts 2 years ago. The family, she claimed, had asked for privacy and didn't want Mary to keep contact with anyone from her past. Mary, the letter said, was doing well and wanted to focus on her new life. The tone was cold, final. It was clearly meant to stop Emma from asking more. But Emma noticed something strange. The handwriting in the letter wasn't consistent. She had a good eye. Years of needlework had trained her to see the smallest imperfections. The body of the letter was written in Sister Agnes's careful hand. But the signature didn't match. It was rushed, almost like someone else had signed it for her. Emma might have let it go. But 3 months later, something else happened. She was shopping at Faneuil Hall when she saw a well-dressed man walking with a young girl. The girl looked about 14, light brown hair, freckles across her nose. Emma recognized her. It was Sarah Thompson, another girl from the academy. But this wasn't a girl raised by a Christian family. She was dressed like the women Emma had seen in the shadows of Boston's Harbor District. Her clothing was far too mature. Her face carried the same hollow stare as Mary's. She moved like someone who had learned not to resist. Emma tried to reach them, but the man hurried Sarah into a carriage. As it pulled away, Sarah looked back, her face pressed against the window. Their eyes met, and Emma saw it. A silent cry for help, a plea that couldn't be spoken. That night, Emma made a decision. She wrote a second letter to St. Catherine's. This time, she didn't hide what she knew. She mentioned seeing both Mary and Sarah in Boston. She asked for exact locations. She asked if she could visit. The reply didn't come from Sister Agnes. It came from Mother Superior Wittmann. The letter was brief, polite, but the message was unmistakably threatening. She said Emma's questions were disturbing the girl's peace. She said Emma might be imagining familiar faces where none existed. She warned Emma to stop. The last line stayed with Emma for the rest of her life. Girls who chase matters that don't concern them often find their own safety and reputation called into question. I trust a sensible young woman like yourself will let sleeping dogs lie. Emma understood exactly what was being said. But she also understood something else. This was no misunderstanding. 2 girls promised a better life were now trapped in something far worse. How many others had disappeared? How many more had been promised sanctuary and delivered into silence? Emma might have stayed silent. But the events of 1847 changed everything. By then, the academy had been running for 13 years. Mother Superior Wittmann was a respected figure. She gave speeches in churches. She preached about Christian duty. But behind the veil, their operation had grown. Too fast, too far. They were no longer placing a few girls. They had become part of a network, a supply chain, from Boston to New York. The mistake came in October 1847. A wealthy merchant named Cornelius Blackwood approached the academy. He wanted a young companion for his wife. He offered 5 times the usual donation. He claimed to live in the western part of the state, but his manner felt too refined. His story didn't hold. He wanted to meet the girls in private. Mother Superior agreed. She introduced him to 3 girls: Catherine Murphy, 15, Elizabeth Porter, 14, and Hannah Clark, 16. All pretty, all obedient, all chosen. But Blackwood wasn't real. He was Detective Inspector William Ashworth. Boston police had been watching the academy. They started after a girl's body was pulled from Boston Harbor. She was around 18, dark hair, soft features, and a strange tattoo, a cross, with the letters S.C. beneath it. Detective Ashworth had seen marks like these before. They often showed up on the bodies of young women pulled from the harbor, victims of lives that ended in the shadows. But these particular tattoos were different. They weren't done by professionals. They looked crude, sloppy ink, uneven lines. The kind of mark someone might make in secret. The letters S.C. weren't just decoration. They pointed to something institutional, something hidden, something bigger than street-level exploitation. Ashworth's investigation had led him deep into Boston's underground. He moved through brothels and private clubs, places where money erased morality. He discovered a system, a well-oiled machine that provided fresh inventory to men with wealth and twisted appetites. These weren't the usual street girls. They were different. They were young, educated, polished, trained to please the elite. And one pattern kept repeating: girls connected in one way or another to St. Catherine's Academy. It wasn't direct evidence that brought Ashworth to the academy. It was the missing persons reports. Dozens of girls gone without a trace over the past 13 years. Not runaways, not troublemakers. Girls who had been placed in respectable homes. Girls who simply vanished. When he looked deeper, the connection became undeniable. Many had once been enrolled at St. Catherine's. Girls who were supposedly adopted by Christian families never wrote back. They never appeared in marriage records, never showed up on census lists. It was like they had been erased. Ashworth's undercover operation was his last hope. What he found at St. Catherine's surpassed even his darkest fears. During their private meeting, Mother Superior Wittmann didn't hide behind piety. She spoke plainly. She described what made some girls more valuable than others: youth, innocence, obedience. She assured Ashworth, posing as Mr. Blackwood, that clients with special requirements could be served. All that was needed was discretion and payment. When he asked to see the girls, she didn't take him to the main dormitory. Instead, she led him to a separate wing of the building, one not shown to most visitors. It was different. Smaller rooms, finer furniture, silk curtains. It didn't feel like an orphanage. It felt like something else entirely. 3 girls were brought in: Catherine Murphy, Elizabeth Porter, Hannah Clark. They wore elegant dresses no orphan could afford. Their hair was styled with precision. Their faces were painted with cosmetics meant to enhance what should have been untouched. but it was their manner that said the most. They had been trained, polished, groomed. They moved and spoke not like children, but like possessions. Ashworth realized then this wasn't just grooming, it was trafficking. As he prepared to leave, something caught his eye. Through a small window he glimpsed another wing, not for display, not for clients. Inside, several girls worked silently at benches under harsh lighting. Their faces were pale, their eyes blank. Sister Agnes stood watch. Ashworth understood then that the academy was split. There were girls being trained for sale, others used for labor, and some, he feared, discarded once they could no longer serve a purpose. But how do you bring down women who had spent 13 years building perfect reputations? They were loved by Salem's ministers, respected by government officials, shielded by the image of holiness. Ashworth needed more than what he saw. He needed proof, and that proof came from Emma Prescott. She had finally come forward. She told the police everything. Her testimony, combined with Ashworth's observations, laid the foundation for a case. But it wasn't enough. He needed irrefutable evidence, and he needed names. What he got was more than he ever expected. It came from Dr. Nathaniel Webb, the Academy's physician, a respected man in his 60s, known for keeping quiet and for accepting payments without asking questions. Ashworth learned that Dr. Webb had been taking money from St. Catherine's for over a decade, far more than any medical work could justify. His involvement began in 1836. He was summoned to treat a girl who had fallen down the stairs. She was 14. Her injuries told a different story. They were signs of rape, violent, deliberate. Dr. Webb treated her, and he stayed silent. He was paid well for that silence. Over the years, he treated dozens more. Girls with injuries too specific to be accidents. Girls with venereal diseases no orphan should have. Girls suffering after what could only be described as botched abortions. But Webb kept records, not for justice, for protection, in case someone ever came asking. And now someone had. Ashworth obtained those records with a warrant. What they revealed was devastating. They documented a pattern of systematic abuse. Girls tied down, violated, infected, tortured under the guise of salvation. Some were left permanently scarred, others died. But the records also held names. Names of the men who had brought girls in for treatment. And they weren't adoptive parents. They were powerful, prominent, respected. A judge, a reverend, a mayor. Judge Harrison Cromwell, known for prosecuting vice. Reverend Samuel Blackstone, famous for sermons on protecting children. Mayor Robert Thornton, who had publicly praised St. Catherine's. Ashworth wasn't just looking at a corrupt academy. He was staring into the heart of a conspiracy. A network of men using religion as a veil. Their victims were voiceless, their crimes hidden behind stained glass and pious words. But there was one more horror to uncover. Dr. Webb's record showed something else. Some of the girls he treated never came back. He asked about them. He was told they had recovered, moved on. Ashworth didn't believe it. He believed they had been eliminated, silenced permanently. To prove it, he needed physical evidence. That's when he turned his attention to the academy itself. Using his authority as a detective, Ashworth conducted a full search. The reason? Building code violations. The reality. He was looking for bodies. The basement told a real story. There was a workshop where girls were forced to produce goods for profit. A makeshift infirmary where Dr. Webb had done his work unseen. A training area where girls were molded for elite clients. But it was the final room that would change everything. Hidden behind a false wall, Ashworth found a furnace, crude, improvised, deadly. Inside he found bone fragments, teeth, charred remains. Tests would later confirm what he already knew. They belonged to girls, multiple girls, all between 12 and 18. Ashworth now had what he needed: proof, witnesses, and the bodies. What began as whispers in an alleyway had become the unraveling of one of the darkest secrets in New England history, and the reckoning had only just begun. "My name isn't Margaret Collins." The woman's Irish accent was gone. What replaced it was the flat, unvarnished tone of rural Massachusetts. "It's Martha Caldwell. And I'm not a nun. None of us are. We're not sisters. We're criminals, murderers. We've used that academy to destroy children for 13 years. She looked directly at Detective Ashworth, the weight of her confession settling like dust in the still room. The woman who had once gone by Sister Margaret began to tell him everything. She, Victoria Whitman, and Agnes Murphy had first met in the Massachusetts State Prison for Women. It was 1833. Each of them was serving time for different crimes: fraud, theft, and in Agnes's case, murder, her own husband for his insurance money. Victoria was the brilliant one, educated, polished, raised in wealth before her family lost everything. She knew how to carry herself like nobility, how to speak like a woman of faith, how to convince people she was something sacred. When the three of them were released in early 1834, she came to them with a plan. It was bold, simple, deadly. Victoria had learned about 3 real Catholic nuns arriving from Ireland: Sister Catherine Morrison, Sister Mary Frances, Sister Teresa Walsh. They were coming to Massachusetts to establish a new orphanage, traveling alone, carrying with them funding and documents to found their mission. Victoria arranged to intercept them. "We told them we were devout Catholic women," Martha said, her voice faltering. "We offered to help guide them to Salem. They never made it." Somewhere along the remote road between Boston and Salem, the 3 true nuns were murdered, stripped of their clothing, their papers, their futures. "We buried them outside Marblehead," Martha whispered, "burned their habits, and put on the uniforms ourselves. When they arrived in Salem, they weren't who they claimed to be, but no one questioned them." Protestant Massachusetts didn't understand the internal workings of Catholic orders. No one asked for verification. No one doubted their faith. They became Sister Victoria, Sister Margaret, Sister Agnes, and they opened the doors of St. Catherine's Academy. At first they tried to run it properly, feed the children, offer education, use the stolen funds to build new lives. But Victoria had a better idea, a darker one, more profitable. It started when a Boston merchant made an offer. He asked to adopt a girl, but his intentions weren't fatherly. He made that clear. He offered a large sum. Victoria took the money. She realized then that there were men, wealthy, powerful men, willing to pay enormous amounts for access to young girls who had no one to protect them. "We began choosing girls no one would miss," Martha said. "No family, no friends outside the academy, no one to ask questions. We told the town they'd been placed with good Christian families. Everyone believed her, because she was Mother Superior, a woman of God. But the truth was far worse than anything Martha had imagined. What began as isolated sales turned into a sprawling system, a network, a marketplace. The academy wasn't a sanctuary. It was a supply chain, recruitment, training, and eventually, disposal. The basement workshop wasn't for teaching embroidery, Martha said. It was where we broke them, where we trained them to obey, to submit, to accept that their bodies no longer belonged to them. The girls who resisted were beaten. The ones who tried to run were made examples of. They were isolated, punished, until they gave in. The prettiest girls were given special training, prepared for elite clients with specific desires. Victoria kept lists, names, preferences. Some men wanted girls who looked like their daughters. Others wanted them to cry. Some paid extra for those who didn't. The darkest part? The pregnancies, the diseases, the ones who aged out. Dr. Webb was brought in to preserve their value as long as possible. But when he couldn't, they were eliminated. Victoria called it retirement, a word that tasted like ash in Martha's mouth. Agnes would take them downstairs, and they never came back. Victoria said they were being transferred, but I knew better. I smelled the smoke. I saw the ashes in the garden. Over the years, more than 60 girls were retired. Some were murdered outright. Some died from injuries or disease. Some were silenced when they threatened to expose us. The 24 girls you're looking for, they're dead. Every one of them. Victoria kept records of each girl. She was proud of them, called them her greatest successes, the ones who earned the most before they were erased. But there was more. It wasn't just St. Catherine's. Victoria had created a network. New York, Connecticut, Rhode Island, Philadelphia, other institutions just like ours. They traded girls, shared clients, helped cover each other's tracks. This isn't about one orphanage, detective. It's a system. I came to you because they were going to kill me, too. I heard them talking, said I was getting soft, a liability. They were planning an accident. Martha's tears ran freely now. I never meant for it to go this far. We just wanted to steal some money and vanish. I never imagined we'd become monsters. I helped murder children, detective. I helped ruin lives. And I can't live with it anymore. She offered him everything. The grave where they buried the real nuns. A list of clients, names of other institutions, transactions, and the location of Victoria's private safe. She keeps it all there, Martha said. Financial ledgers, photos, letters, things that could destroy powerful men, things that could destroy her. Ashworth knew what he was holding. The biggest criminal conspiracy in the state's history. But he also knew the danger. The men on that client list would do anything to protect themselves. They had power, resources, and no mercy. He had to move quickly. With Martha's help, Ashworth planned the raid. November 16th, 1847, just before dawn. He bypassed Boston police. Too many ties, too many risks. He called in the state police, federal marshals, men who weren't in anyone's pocket. What they found at the academy stunned even the most hardened officers. In Victoria's private safe, evidence of 127 girls trafficked through the school, 68 murdered. Among them, the 24 girls whose names would haunt the case forever. The client list was staggering. 3 federal judges, 12 state legislators, 5 mayors, dozens of businessmen, pastors, even a member of Congress. Victoria Vittman was captured while trying to escape to Canada, a suitcase full of gold and jewelry in her hands. Agnes Murphy was found destroying evidence in the crematorium, the place where so many had died. The man known as Father Ali vanished and was never found. The trials were some of the most notorious in Massachusetts history. Victoria, even facing mountains of proof, denied everything, said she ran a school, blamed enemies for forging the records. She was convicted on 68 counts of murder, sentenced to death. Agnes claimed coercion, but the evidence showed otherwise. She, too, was sentenced to death. Martha Caldwell, for her cooperation, received life in prison. She spent 32 years behind bars, and in a twist of fate, became known for teaching fellow inmates to read. Dr. Webb testified. His records were critical. He was sentenced to 20 years, but he died of a heart attack after less than 2. The investigation into the client list was less satisfying. Some fled. Some bribed their way out. Some simply denied everything. But the truth was out, and the voices of the girls, once silenced, had finally been heard, and maybe, just maybe, remembered. Judge Harrison Cromwell was found dead in his study 3 days before he was set to testify. The cause appeared to be suicide, a final act to avoid the disgrace that was waiting. He wasn't the only one. Several other men connected to the case died under similarly suspicious circumstances. Some whispered it was guilt. Others suspected they had been silenced permanently. In the end, only 12 of the more than 50 men identified in the records were ever prosecuted. The rest slipped through justice's fingers, shielded by their wealth, their titles, their influence, and by a society too afraid to confront its own reflection. But the evidence was real, undeniable. The bones pulled from the crematorium told their story silently, fragmented, scorched, but not forgotten. Tiny shoes, burned scraps of dresses, teeth too small to belong to adults. The grave outside Marblehead held its own grim testimony. 3 real nuns, others never identified, buried deep beneath lies and sanctimony. Before officials could fully secure the site, the academy itself was set upon by a furious mob. They torched the building. By morning, only blackened stone and ash remained. No one tried to stop them. Emma Prescott, the seamstress whose suspicions had sparked everything, was first hailed as a heroine. But her fame turned sour. She was accused of stirring unrest, of smearing good names. She received letters laced with threats. She stopped walking alone at night. Eventually, she vanished westward. California. A new name. A quiet death in 1891. Her bravery helped change the law. Massachusetts rewrote its rules for orphanages and charitable homes. Routine inspections became mandatory. Staff credentials had to be verified. Record-keeping became law. Other states followed. New England learned from its shame. Too late for some, but not for all. And then there were the girls. The 24 whose names had once been lost. Mary O'Brien, 13, murdered in 1837 after trying to escape. Sarah Thompson, 15, died in 1839 from tuberculosis, left untreated. Catherine Murphy, 12, beaten to death in 1840 for refusing a client's demands. And 21 more, each with a name, each with a story, each with a life cut short by cruelty wrapped in holy robes. A memorial was raised for them, Salem's Green Lawn Cemetery, paid for by the people, their names carved into stone. The inscription reads, "In memory of the innocent victims of St. Catherine's Academy." May their names never be forgotten, and may their suffering never be repeated. Detective William Ashworth was promoted. He became chief of police in Boston. But he never married. He never stopped working. He spent the rest of his life tracking predators in positions of trust. He died in 1889, carrying with him the sorrow of what he hadn't stopped in time. The academy grounds were never rebuilt. No institution replaced it. No school, no chapel. Eventually, the land became a small park. Children laugh there now, safely. But on quiet nights, some say you can hear the sound of singing, soft lullabies rising from the trees, voices of girls finally at peace. To this day, the St. Catherine's Academy file remains one of the most requested records in the Massachusetts archives. Researchers, journalists, curious minds searching for something buried too long, they ask the same questions. Were there more institutions like it? How many powerful men escaped the noose? How many children vanished without names, without graves, without witnesses? What we know is chilling. The evil that lived in that academy wasn't supernatural. It wasn't the work of spirits or monsters. It was human. It was choices made by people who valued profit over mercy, power over protection, silence over truth. The true horror wasn't in shadows. It wore collars and habits and badges. The 24 girls who never left St. Catherine's didn't find peace through exorcism or prayer. They found peace through courage, through Emma, through Ashworth, through every person who refused to look away. Now their names are etched in stone, permanent, unmovable. They are reminders that every child matters, that justice must not wait until it's too late. Because the worst predators are not always the ones we fear. Sometimes they are the ones we trust the most. What do you think? Was everything truly uncovered? Or were there darker secrets buried with Victoria Whitman? Leave your thoughts below. If this story disturbed you, if it made you think, subscribe. Click the bell. Share it with someone who believes monsters are only in fiction. Because the truth is, the most terrifying stories are the ones that actually happened. See you in the next video.